She's still alive. Can you tell me why you attacked her on that night? On this night? What led to it? Just had feelings. What sort of feeling? Can you possibly describe where you had this feeling? Just wanted to kill.
Should the Frankston serial killer get parole? The Frankston serial killer Paul Denyer is currently serving life imprisonment in Barwon Prison for the murders of Elizabeth Stevens, 18, Debbie Feem, 22, and Natalie Russell, who was 17, in Frankston, Victoria of 1993. Denyer was born to British immigrant parents Anthony and Maureen in Campbelltown of New South Wales, an outer suburb of Sydney. His parents had immigrated to Australia back in 1965, and in 1981 the family relocated to Victoria. Born Paul Charles Denyer in Sydney on April 14th, 1972. He was the third of 6 children, 5 boys and a girl. Denyer reportedly had a difficult time fitting in amongst his peers in his new town, which led to problems with his self-confidence that was only worsened by a significant weight gain in his teen years. His murderous intentions started at an early age when he regularly dissected his sister's teddy bears with a homemade knife, and when he was 10, he stabbed the family kitten and hung it from a tree in the backyard. Later on, while working at what would be his last place of employment, he allegedly slaughtered and dismembered 2 goats in a paddock next door. In 1992, Denyer moved into a flat on the Dandenong Road in Frankston, which he shared with Sharon Johnson, in a block of flats. It was here where Denyer's dangerous behaviour escalated. One of the other tenants arrived home to find their flat broken into and her clothes and engagement pictures slashed. Another caught a glimpse of someone peeping through her windows. Denyer and Johnson had become quite friendly with their neighbour Trisha and her sister Donna, who lived with her fiancé Les in another flat. Les and Donna were also parents of a tiny baby who also lived in the flat with them. One night in February 1993, Les and Donna arrived home about 11 p.m. with the baby in its bassinet, only to be confronted with the most horrific of scenes. On the lounge room wall, next to the television set, was written in blood were the words "Dead Don," and laying on the floor in the middle of the kitchen was the remains of Donna's cat. The cat had a picture of a woman in a bikini over its disemboweled body. Entrails from the cat had been dragged through the kitchen. Also, the cat's blood was sprayed everywhere, and written in blood in the middle of it all were the words, "Donna, you're dead." One of the cat's eyes was bulging from its sockets while the other one was missing. In the bathroom they found 2 kittens with their throats cut, laying in the baby's bath of bloodied water. In the main bathroom, the intruder had ransacked every drawer and clothes were ripped and thrown everywhere. Les's collection of centerfold pin-ups had also been slashed and stabbed with a sharp instrument. A stabbed photo of a semi-clad model was also draped across the baby's crib. Over a 7-week period in the summer of 1993, 3 young women aged 17, 18 and 22 were violently stabbed and slashed to death, with one happening in broad daylight in and around the Frankston area, which is about a 40-minute drive from Melbourne, in the state of Victoria's east. A 41-year-old woman was also violently assaulted and considered herself lucky to escape with her life. On Saturday, June 12, 1993, the partly clothed body of 18-year-old student Elizabeth Stevens was found in Lloyd Park on Cranbourne Road in Langwarrin, which is a short distance drive from Frankston. The teenager had been reported missing the previous evening by her uncle and auntie, to whom she was staying with. Naked from the waist up, Elizabeth Stevens had her throat cut. There were 6 deep knife wounds in her chest, 4 deep cuts running from her breasts to her navel, and many more forming a crisscross pattern over her abdomen. Elizabeth Stevens' face had severe cuts and abrasions, and her nose was swollen, indicating that it had indeed been broken. Her bra was around her neck. A post-mortem would also reveal that she had not been sexually assaulted. The killing was as senseless as it was brutal. Elizabeth didn't have an enemy in the world. Police believed that the attack had to be of a random killing or perhaps a rape gone wrong. Police mounted a huge search for the killer. They used a life-size mannequin at a roadblock at the bus stop where Elizabeth had last been seen, in the hopes that someone may recognise her and hopefully the person she may have been with. On the evening of July 8, 1993, 41-year-old bank clerk Rosa Toth was making her way home from work to Seaford in the Frankston area when she was violently attacked by a man who said that he had a gun. He tried to drag her into a nearby nature reserve. Mrs. Toth put up the fight of her life this night as the man pulled out clumps of her hair. She bit him on the fingers straight to the bone on several occasions. Eventually, she managed to fight off the man, and with torn stockings and trousers and no shoes, she managed to hail down a passing car as her assailant fled into the night. Mrs. Toth had no doubt that if she had not resisted as strongly as she did, she most likely would have been murdered. She contacted the local police, who were at the scene in just minutes. Sadly, they found nothing. Later that same evening, 22-year-old Debbie Feem was abducted. She had left her car unlocked to run into a store to buy milk. Denyer climbed into the back seat, and he hijacked the car after Feem drove from the store. She was taken to Taylor's Road, and, like Stevens, her throat was slashed savagely. She had left her 12-day-old baby at home with a friend while she left to buy the milk. 4 days later, her body was found by a farmer in one of his paddocks near Carrum Downs. Debbie had been stabbed around the neck and head. Her chest and arms also had 24 slashings. She had been strangled. And like Elizabeth, she also had not been sexually assaulted. The attack on Mrs. Toth, which had been considered a purse snatching gone wrong, was now considered to be the work of the same killer of Elizabeth and Debbie. There was no doubt a madman was loose in Frankston. On the afternoon of July 30th, 1993, a 17-year-old Natalie Russell went missing while riding her bike home from John Paul College in Frankston. 8 hours later, her body was found in the bushes beside a bike track that ran between the Peninsula and Log Island golf clubs. She had been stabbed repeatedly around the face and neck. Her throat had been cut. It appears that the savagery in Natalie Russell's slaying was far worse than the previous two victims. Natalie also hadn't been sexually assaulted. But this time, the killer had left a damning piece of evidence that would prove him guilty should he ever be apprehended. A piece of skin, possibly from a finger, was found around the neck of Natalie. As the skin didn't belong to Natalie, the only possible explanation was that the killer had cut himself as he attacked the student. A slither of his flesh had attached itself, stuck by the drying blood onto his skin. None of the victims knew each other, and there was nothing to connect them in any way except for the fact that they all lived in Frankston, or around the area. After the first two murders and the assault, police made it very clear that there was indeed a serial killer on the loose. The killer chose his victims at random and murdered them for no apparent reason. Tragically, they would be proven right. The murder of Elizabeth Stevens was the first incident to attract a larger investigation, as did the appearance of Debbie. When the search was organised and scuba divers examined the Cannonook Creek, no external forensic evidence was ever found at the Stevens scene, and no witnesses came forward. Sadly, it was the same with Debbie's case. No forensic evidence was ever found at the scene due to the poor weather, but a witness later recalls her car, which was a grey Nissan Pulsar, had been seen driving erratically and flashing its high beams. Her car was then located the next day by the local police department in Madden Street. Forensic found traces of Debbie's blood inside, as well as a new dent in the front, and the driver's seat had been pushed back, which confirms Denyer's story about how he climbed into the back seat and then threatened her with a gun shortly after she returned from the store. With little to no evidence from the first two murders and attack, the police had very little to go on. It wouldn't be until the murder of Natalie Russell would police get their first lead. On the day of Natalie Russell's murder, at 2:30 p.m, a postal worker saw a rusted yellow Toyota Corolla without number plates. It was parked near the same track that Natalie was found, on Sky Road. The man was using binoculars and acting suspicious inside the vehicle. As she stopped at a house to call the police, she noticed Natalie Russell approaching the track alone. The postal worker noted that Natalie was being watched by the man in the car, who then ran up the track. Police responded and noted the registration label number. He then did a few door knocks in the local area before being called to another job. Once the detectives received the information, they worked out that the car was indeed registered to Mr. Paul Danya. Detectives then visited his small unit located on Dandenong Road on the afternoon of the 31st of July, a unit that he shared with his girlfriend. While his movements were being checked, he admitted being in the vicinity of both Debbie and Natalie's murders. Danya was then taken to the Frankston police station and his videoed interview commenced at 9:20 p.m. He was unable to explain the cuts and scratches to the officers that they noted. Danya also admitted to being in the area where Elizabeth was attacked and murdered. He agreed to have his DNA collected, and early on the 1st of August, suspecting that police had his DNA evidence, admitted to the murders and the assault on Mrs. Toth. He also admitted the break-in that happened at Les and Donna's house and the murder of the cat and her kittens. He admitted to detectives that he had been stalking women in Frankston for many years, and his motivation for the crime was just a desire to kill, which he's had since the age of 14. He also had a general hatred for girls and women. At his trial on December 15, 1993, before Justice Vincent at the Supreme Court of Victoria, Paul Danya pleaded guilty to all charges. Psychologists and experts examined Danya, noting his lack of emotion regarding the crimes, a single-minded desire to kill, and the unusual at random at which his victims were chosen, leading to a diagnosis of sadistic personality disorder, but was legally sane. Danya showed no remorse for his crimes. In fact, he revelled in telling the murders over and over. It seemed that he got pleasure out of recounting them. Danya tried to blame his upbringing and many other factors in his life to the reason that he went down the path of a serial killer. On the 20th of December 1993, after 4 days of the hearing, the Frankston serial killer Paul Danya was sentenced to 3 consecutive sentences of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Danya quickly launched an appeal, and in July 1994, he was granted a non-parole period of 30 years. Whilst in custody, Paul Danya began identifying as a woman. He claimed that the feeling of gender dysphoria is what led him to seek revenge against women by murdering them. At the time of this recording, in 2023, when the month hits July, Paul, now going by Paula, will be eligible for parole. Questions now need to be asked. If Paula was to be released on parole, does the Frankston serial killer still pose a risk? Is Paula truly reformed? Or will her violent history continue? It's documented that a person who shows this kind of violence and this level of sadistic personality are a higher risk of reoffending. The signs had been apparent from a young age, where he tortured and killed young animals, before escalating to murder, which is a key indicator of a serial killer. Can someone of this magnitude of hate and lack of care and remorse truly be released back into the community without incident? Can we as a community feel safe knowing that this killer is back on the street? Let me know your comments. If you believe, like many do, that the Frankston serial killer should remain in prison, then feel free to visit the petition in the description below. What are your thoughts? Would you feel safe knowing that this man, this woman, is now in your neighbourhood? Thank you for your time. Feel free to subscribe, and as always, stay safe out there.